I just remembered a fun encounter that might serve as a warning to those working late at night. I was 24 at the time this happened, working in a nightclub about a 10-minute walk from my home. I used to close on Tuesday nights slightly earlier than the other nights, as it was generally our slowest night of the week, closing at around 12 a.m. instead of keeping customers until 2:30. Usually I'd be the only one left, as I'd start cutting staff as the night went on. Since it was a slower day of the week, we didn't have security on either. About 2 months in of regularly closing at 12 a.m., I was walking home. I used to bring some bulkier clothes to hide my figure when leaving alone, as I'd been followed and chased home many times before. In fact, we'd often get men waiting after hours just for the girls to come out, knowing we'd eventually have to after closing. I didn't want to attract attention to myself. I also used to walk home, as I didn't have a car at that time. I'd had a few weird experiences with Uber drivers not actually taking me home. It's surprising how often fake cabs try to show up or the drivers just harass you until you pretend to show interest or give them some way of contacting you. Uber just gives you a $5 coupon for all the trouble. I guess that's a story for another time though. The bar was located along a main road that was home to the majority of the other bars and restaurants in the city downtown as well. Often at this time, I'd see about a handful of people around. The streets were generally pretty empty though. I was walking along when I noticed a parked car about a block away. The driver turned and looked at me, then U-turned around to be on the same side of the street as me. Now he was catcalling me, trying to get me to come into his car. I didn't engage, of course, and simply kept on walking. We were maybe a block or two past the initial spot I'd seen him, and he was still slowly driving along the sidewalk. I would have crossed the street, but I didn't have to want to get anywhere near his car. He kept this up until about the halfway mark, when he took off in his car, and I was relieved he was now gone. But of course, that wasn't it. Guess who comes blasting back down the road? He did. Now my walk turned into a jog, which then turned into me full-on running. I was running behind closed bars and businesses, trying to find a back route to get home without him seeing where I lived. He followed me for so long that at one point I was even running through bushes and mud. No matter what street I would end up on, his car would always be waiting for me. Eventually, I happened to run right in front of his car while it was parked on the side street beside my place. I ran into my house to the back entrance. The back entrance was obscured by plenty of trees, cars, and the surrounding houses. They were multiple unit homes as well, so I was confident he hadn't seen what door I'd gone in through. Fast forward to the following Tuesday, and I'm walking home once more. Guess whose car was parked exactly at the halfway mark? This went on for the next 4 weeks. Except, as time went on, he started parking closer on the street to the front of my house each time. I begged my manager to take me off closing that specific shift. The last time I saw him, one of the apartment buildings along the way had a few cop cars and cops standing around the entrance. I stayed with them when he tried to follow me, which led to him driving off for that night. A week passed by and I was no longer on that shift. A coworker of mine sent me a news article via text. I opened it and saw that the man who had been following me was arrested for doing this to multiple girls in the city, all along the street my work was on and that I lived on. He'd gotten caught because he'd followed a university student all the way to her house and wouldn't drive away. She called the cops and he was still there by the time they came to arrest him, surprisingly. He got out the next day, I believe, and was arrested a few more times, put on restrictions even. Couldn't be out of his parents' house between certain hours and unaccompanied by either parent, before he was deported altogether. I didn't keep up with the news on him much more after that. This happened several years ago. I was home alone one evening when I heard a knock at the back door. This confused me, as no one ever used that door in our house. My husband and I lived in a fourplex at the time, and all of the units had a back door at the top of a narrow staircase. Those doors were a little inconvenient to access. as you'd have to go around the building and up the narrow stairs as opposed to the wider and obvious main entrance at the front. It didn't make much sense to use that entrance, and I couldn't think of anyone who might want to visit using it. As I approached the back door slowly, I could see 2 tall men in the window, standing right outside. A chill went down my spine. I didn't feel safe just opening the door, so I called out instead. "Hello?" One of the men tapped on the window. Yes, hello. May we come in? We're with Bresnan." At the time, my husband and I had Bresnan for cable, but we weren't having any issues with it. Needless to say, I was very confused. We're not having any issues at the moment. Is there a problem?" "Ma'am, can we come in? We're servicing the entire area and it's very important we look at your cable. We're not having any issues, so there's no need to stop by." "Ma'am, we're visiting every resident. Let us in so we can do our jobs." I noticed the man was now grabbing the doorknob quite fiercely and trying to open the locked door. I slowly grabbed a knife from our knife block and held it close to the chest. "We're not having any issues," I repeated, trying not to convey shakiness in my voice. "You don't need to be here." The 2 figures appeared to whisper to each other for a moment, then straighten up. "Ma'am, let us in right now. We're on a deadline and we need to do our job." I glanced at the clock, gauging when my husband would arrive home from work, and I gripped the knife tighter. Ma'am, open up!" I saw him try the doorknob once more. I closed my eyes and felt overwhelming gratitude that I'd remembered to lock my doors. Just then, a thought came to the forefront of my mind. "I'm sorry, I can't help you. Can I at least get your names and badge numbers? I'll give your supervisor a call to let them know everything's fine." I heard a bunch of shuffling outside. Then one of the men replied, "No need, ma'am. We're sorry we wasted your time tonight." With that, both of the men ran down the staircase and disappeared into the night. Shaken up, I held the knife tight and tried to get my bearings. I remember making a mental note to call the cable company or the police, but my hands were shaking so badly I couldn't grip my phone. With the knife still grasped to my chest and the phone falling out of my other hand, I sank down to the floor and cried. When my husband returned home, I told him what happened. I was still very shaken up and had started crying again after he came home. He immediately called the cable company and spoke to a representative, who informed us that no one from their company was out on assignment in our area. The next day, we asked all our neighbors if they'd had a visit as well, but no one had heard anything. I was recently reminded of a not-so-fun moment that happened last year. At the time, I, 24 and female, had the entire lower/main floor unit I lived in to myself. I used to bartend/manage a nightclub a few blocks away, and would usually get home around 4 a.m. or so. This night, I had just finished a 12-hour shift. I was exhausted and quite hungry, so I decided to simply order some food. I placed the order, got my joint rolled and ready for when the food arrived, and put on a movie to wait. Eventually, I heard the doorbell ring. Being alone and it being quite late at night, I wanted to get the photos sent to the delivery app to verify my food was actually at the door. I really didn't want to have to make small talk with the driver, as post-COVID, I still kept the option for contactless delivery. 3 to 5 minutes passed by. I got the photo of the food on the doorstep and decided to get up and go get it finally. My bedroom window had 5 large windows that gave me my full view of the path along the house, the main street in front, our garbage area, and the area right in front of our unit's door. I could see the driver was surprisingly still out there. Now he started texting me to come out and get my food. I told him he'd left it in a perfect spot, and I'd be out shortly to get it. I told him thanks for delivering it, and that he could go now. At this point, I was just waiting for him to leave. Even though marijuana is legal here, people can still be a bit judgmental. I didn't want to go out in my PJs to collect my food, smoke, and see another human after working all night. He didn't leave though, no matter how long I waited. He kept on texting me to come outside. Now as well, I could hear him talking to another male voice. My window view was unfortunately obscuring the other person though. The food in the photo had been right against my door, but I could see him slowly moving it away and off to the side, so I'd have to fully go out and walk around a small corner to collect it. I kept texting him telling me it was fine. I was glad he'd followed the instructions and that he could leave now and I'd be out shortly. He began to bang on the front door, still whispering to this other male voice. He moved my food even further away and wouldn't stop banging and demanding me to come outside. Eventually, I lied and told him I had COVID and I didn't want him to get sick. After I saw he'd read my message on the app, he put my food right back in front of the front door and walked out through the back parking lot, even though initially he'd come in through the front. Something about the entire encounter felt so off. I waited for 15 minutes until I couldn't see or hear anyone. I quickly opened the door and grabbed my food. The entire ordeal lasted an hour. My food was nice and cold, of course. The joint was out away for another day, and my heart was racing for the rest of the night. Last year, I was on vacation in Southern Europe with a large group of friends. We had been there a while and always took an Uber from our rented house to the city, which had very nice bars and clubs. The thing about Uber, though, is it allows very cheap and flexible transport, but it opens the door for quite a lot of creeps. I've had Uber drivers who are super cool, of course, but also extremely drugged up road ragers who drive like maniacs and think they're so impressive. It's always the worst once an attractive woman sits in the car. It feels like a lot of creeps think, now that I have her here in this situation where she can't flee, she has to talk and be nice to me. For that very reason, one of the guys of our group always used their phone to call the Uber, so no creep would pick up the ride specifically because a woman ordered it. Some of my friends even used fake male names because of this. The guy we got this day was by far the worst. It was late in the evening. An Uber picked us up and drove me, 27 and male, my friend, also 27 and male, and two female friends to the desired Old Town, where we planned to go clubbing and drink a bit. While driving, the driver was constantly staring at the two women in the back seat via the mirror. He kept on trying to start conversations as well, only talking to the girls and completely ignoring the guys. The girls gave short, non-detailed answers, of course. To us, he seemed way too pushy. He also didn't seem that big on hygiene, giving off the classic, "this exact scenario is why we don't like booking Ubers" vibe. Meanwhile, we couldn't wait to arrive at our destination and get out of this uncomfortable but not super bad situation. Boy, did it not feel great though, when this guy did not stop on the road, but instead pulled into a parking spot. He started to fumble with his phone. We thought it was pretty weird and left, thinking the guy would just leave. To our surprise though, he turned his car off and started to follow us. Just started walking right alongside us without saying a single word. After 400 feet, we reached the gates. We stopped because this was the meeting spot for the other half of our group, who had taken a separate car. It was around this point that we realized the guy was following a short distance behind us, and he stopped with us as well. You know the classic circle people form while talking? This guy was just kind of standing next to it staring at us because people wouldn't let him in. We started making conversation about how long the others would take to get here, where they were right now, etc. The guy started to get very annoyed apparently. He thought he was part of the posse or something. Oh cool, even more people. Must be a great evening you've got planned. We texted our friends in the group chat that we were changing the meeting place to this bar. The Uber driver was just following us around. One of us started leading the group at a quick pace through the streets. They were very small with lots of people. We took turns at every corner, trying to lose the guy, but he kept on chasing after us. Finally, we reached a big plaza where there were hundreds of other people packed closely together, basically queuing to enter the narrow street up ahead. We pushed through like rude douchebags and successfully lost the guy. Finally, we could just head straight to the bar after our detour and linked up with the other half of our group. 2 hours passed by and life was very good. We decided to head to another bar a bit further away because drinks and prices kinda sucked at this one. We'd had 2 drinks in that bar when guess who walked right through the door and stood next to the table? The Uber guy. "Hello, ladies, what's up?" At this point, a friend who was good at communicating and very big told the guy that he wanted to keep to ourselves. We had no interest in hanging out with this man. The guy held his hands up. "No problem," and he left. Unfortunately, around 3 a.m. while dancing in a crowd, the same man announced his presence by tenderly grabbing the back of one of the girls we had been staring at through the mirror in the car. The girl's boyfriend recognized the guy, got angry as fuck, and grabbed him by the collar. He told him that if he kept following us, we would beat the shit out of him. The bouncer saw this and approached as well. I started talking to the bouncer. At first, he was super annoyed by having to deal with a fight, but after hearing how this guy had stalked us all the way to the club from his car, he asked a few follow-up questions and then proceeded to throw the man out. We stayed a bit longer than we wanted, in hopes of him not waiting for us again. After that, we reported him for being a creep in the app and called another Uber, which thankfully was not him. This happened about 15 years ago. I was 21 years old and living in my very first apartment. It was a small bachelor apartment in a fairly sketchy area. I grew up in a town that was known to be rough and tough. I knew how to handle myself because of this, and learned at a young age to keep my head down and not go looking for trouble. My apartment building was behind a bar. A lot of the customers would stand outside to smoke. When they did, they would always be looking at my apartment. Most of the people who were out smoking kept to themselves. A few would nod and say hello if I happened to be there. Never really any issues, until one evening. One evening, I arrived home from work and passed by the bar, where I saw an extremely tall man outside smoking. As I passed by, I could feel him staring at me. I gave him a slight nod, but he didn't acknowledge me at all, just continued to stare. It was a bit weird, but I didn't really think that much of it. Maybe he was just lost in thought or something. About an hour later, though, I heard a sudden knock at my door. This was very odd because you had to buzz people into the building. The building only had 8 units, and I didn't really know any of the neighbors, so I had no idea who this could be. I froze because I really didn't want to talk to anyone, but the knocking continued. Finally, I called out, "Who is it?" There was no response. I called out again, "Who's there?" "It's me. It's Tom." I didn't know anyone named Tom, so I shouted back, "I don't know anyone called that. You must have the wrong apartment." What he said next chilled me. "You may not know me, but I sure know you. Open up, we can talk a bit." I went over to the peephole and saw it was that tall man from the bar. "Fuck off or I'm calling the cops." I heard his footsteps walk away slightly. Then I heard the building door open and close. At least he'd left without much fuss. Or so I thought. A few minutes later, I peeked out the window, only to see he was standing in the parking lot. He seemed to be whispering something to himself, walking around and looking crazed. At this point, I was freaking out. I called my landlord who lived in the building next to me. He told me to call the police, and in the meantime, he and his brother would come to check things out. I called the cops and told them what was happening. They said a car was on the way. Meanwhile, my landlord and his brother made their way to the parking lot. I watched out the window and saw them approach the tall man. He took one look at them and bolted into the night. My landlord and his brother tried to chase him, but the man got away. About 5 minutes later, the police arrived. I gave my version of events and also a description of the man. The officer then told me this: "We've had reports of a man matching that description who's been sexually assaulting women in the area. Thank God you didn't open the door." A few days later, I got a call from the officer. He told me part of their investigation was talking to the owner of the bar. The owner called the police when the tall dude reappeared after a few days, and the police responded and swiftly arrested him. I used to fight with my parents a lot as a teenager. That led to them kicking me out once I graduated high school. I was almost 19 at that point. For me, that wasn't much of a problem. I had my own job, my own cheap car, and my friend's parents had a spare bedroom they were willing to let me rent out for a while. It worked out just fine for me. This being said, I will change all the names. Let's call my friend Kelly and her mom Lena. Her dad is Kenneth. Kenneth and Lena had a lot of weird friends due to the fact they were quite fierce partiers. A lot of these friends were genuinely nice people, just a little bit weird. You could tell they had issues such as drugs or criminal pasts, but none of them were bad or mean or creepy or anything like that. There was one particular guy though that was just beyond weird. Just someone who, even though I didn't know him at all, he made my skin crawl the moment I looked at him. We'll call him Joey. I came home from work one day, and the only person there at our house was Joey. As soon as I walked in, he said hello, then made some comment about how beautiful I was. I don't consider myself good looking in the slightest, so I just kinda said thanks and walked off to start doing my normal routine. As I was making my lunch and cleaning up my mess, I could feel someone staring at me from behind. It was Joey. He'd followed me into the kitchen and was now blocking the only doorway, just standing there watching me. I asked him if I could get him anything, but he shook his head and continued to watch me. This made me very uncomfortable, of course. I kinda shoved him out of the way and fled for my room. I locked the door until I heard everyone else get home. Joey finally left around dinner time. I thought it was fine and went about my nightly routine and went to bed as usual. He must have come back at some point though, because he was sitting at the breakfast table when I went down to get my cereal. Again, the whole time he just stared daggers at me, so I took my food to my room instead. Friday night rolled around. Lena, Kenneth, and Kelly told me they were going to throw this huge party and I should invite whoever I wanted. I just had a gut feeling though that Joey was going to be there. I invited the most intimidating male person I could think of, my neighbor Charles. He was a pretty huge guy, around 6'5" or so. He was also covered nearly head to toe in tattoos and happened to be an ex-Hell's Angel. He was the type that, unless provoked, wouldn't hurt anybody. I explained while inviting him the day before about how Joey was behaving. What he told me scared the shit out of me. Turns out he actually knew Joey. Apparently, he was on the run from the police for raping some teenage girls the year before and said I needed to stay as far away from him as possible no matter what. You'd think that would be where the scary part ended, but no, it gets worse. I'm usually not a cop caller myself since I can hang with an unsavory crowd sometimes, but I went straight home, packed all my things, left to a safe place and called the police. Here's the worst part. When they finally arrested him, they took a look through his phone. I don't know how the hell he managed this, but he had multiple pictures of me on it. Most of them were of me sleeping, or me in the shower or using the bathroom. He had texts to another person about me, and about what they were planning to do with me when he got the opportunity. I no longer talk to Kelly or her parents, and when someone gives me a bad vibe, I instantly get away from them. I'll forever be grateful to Charles as well, because he might have just saved my life by letting me know all that.